The air in the Grand Monarch's lobby tasted of money and the persistent, weeping rain that slicked the Washington, D.C. streets outside. A draft from the constantly spinning brass and glass of the revolving doors cut through the humid, almost suffocating scent of hothouse lilies and a dozen competing perfumes. Their cloying sweetness was a funereal note against the low, thrumming energy of the charity gala. Towering crystal chandeliers dripped honeyed light onto marble floors, polished to a black mirror that warped and reflected the frantic, silent dance of camera flashes from the press line. Elena Vance, a vision in winter white silk, paused just inside the entrance, allowing the gilded chaos to wash over her. The dress was a deceptively simple, elegant column, its clean, severe lines disrupted only by the gentle, determined swell of her belly. For a moment, she was perfectly still, a statue of ivory in a river of noise and motion. She scanned the chaotic swarm of the city's elite, the politicians, the lobbyists, the old money matriarchs, her hand instinctively rising to rest where her unborn son slept. The low hum of 100 conversations was a single, predatory purr. She drew a slow breath, centering herself, creating a silent bubble for two in the heart of the storm. The tranquility was short-lived, a fragile illusion against the undercurrent of the city's predatory elite. Before she could fully acclimate to the gilded chaos, a shadow fell over her. A man materialized from the crowd, deliberately blocking her path. Broad, imposing, his dark, bespoke suit strained at the shoulders, a block of shadow against the lobby's golden light. George Thompson, head of Capitol Security, offered a smile that was merely a stretching of lips, failing entirely to touch the cold, flat chips of his eyes. "Well, well," he began, his voice a low rumble that carried with practiced ease over the distant, genteel melody of a string quartet. "Look what the storm blew in." He let his eyes travel down her form, from her face to the curve of her stomach and back up again, a slow, insolent appraisal. "If it isn't the little mother. Lost, are we? This is the governor's private reception, A-list only, not a daycare." Beside him, a woman in a blood-red dress that clung to her like a second skin let out a laugh, a sharp, ugly sound like shattering glass. "Brenda Hayes!" Her bracelets, a vulgar tangle of gold and clattering, oversized charms, shrieked with every slight movement. She leaned into George, her crimson nails sharpened to points, digging possessively into his arm. "George, baby, be nice," she purred, her voice dripping with malice. "You'll frighten her. Maybe she's the entertainment." George's smile widened, a flash of predator's glee. "The entertainment? No, no, darling. This one's contribution was less public." He took a small step forward, invading Elena's space. "Isn't that right, Elena? You excel at things done in the quiet, in the dark." His voice lowered. "Tell me, does the governor know you're here? Did he send a little embossed invitation for his little project?" Elena's chin lifted a fraction of an inch. Her hand remained a steady, warm pressure on her belly, a silent anchor. "I was invited, George." "Invited?" He barked a laugh, loud and performative, turning to the small circle of onlookers that had started to gather. Their champagne flutes paused mid-air. "She says she was invited! That's rich, isn't it?" He gestured vaguely toward Elena with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "You see, the thing about invitations, Elena, is that they're for people who belong, people who matter, not for back-alley benefactors who think a checkbook buys a seat at the table. You bought a building, not a pedigree." He stepped closer again, forcing her back a half step. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper that still managed to slice through the ambient noise, a neat trick of acoustics and menace. He smelled of stale cigars, expensive whiskey, and a lifetime of entitlement. I run security for this state. I know every secret that slithers through these marble halls. I know who comes and goes from the governor's mansion at 3 in the morning. I know who pays for what, and I know you are nothing more than a check, a silent, anonymous, inconvenient little check. Brenda giggled, a cascade of jangling, obnoxious jewelry. A blank check, Georgie? Or is it already filled out? Not for much longer, George sneered, his eyes dropping deliberately to Elena's stomach again, lingering there with calculated offense. Looks like you're about to be cashing out. Tell me, was this part of the deal? Secure the funding? Secure the man? Did you think that little bump would be your lifetime pass into this world? He gestured to the opulent lobby around them. A pathetic, biological key to a door I keep locked. From across the lobby, a journalist, Sarah Jenkins, who had been observing the scrum, smoothly detached herself from the pack. She lifted her phone, not in a quick, furtive motion, but with deliberate calm. The screen's cool glow illuminated her focused, impassive expression. She said nothing. She simply framed the escalating confrontation in her lens. The phone was a slab of dark glass, a weapon of witness, its unblinking eye capturing every sneer, every flinch. Elena's own eyes were steady, calm. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but cut through his bluster. You are mistaken. Mistaken? The word was a cannon blast of indignation. George's face, already florid, flushed a deep, mottled purple. A vein throbbed at his temple. He jabbed a thick, furious finger toward her belly, stopping just short of making contact. I am never mistaken. I am the gatekeeper. I decide who is worthy. You think because you threw money at a problem, you are suddenly someone? You are a womb for hire clinging to a powerful man's coattails. You funded his projects, and now you think you own a piece of him. That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works. He took a final, menacing step forward. Elena, unable to retreat further, felt the cold, unyielding body of a large ceramic vase of lilies press against her spine. The scent was now overpowering, thick and funereal in her nostrils. You have no power here, he hissed, his monologue a torrent of venom aimed directly at her face. The powerful don't need to show up. They don't need to get their hands dirty. They send people like me to handle people like you. You are a loose end, a complication. And tonight, you are an embarrassment the governor does not need. You are leaving. He leaned in, his final words a guttural threat. One way or another. He grabbed her upper arm. His grip was iron, his thick fingers digging mercilessly into her flesh. Brenda, sensing the climax of the performance, clapped her hands together, a sharp, percussive sound that made several onlookers jump. Show's over, folks. Nothing to see here, she announced brightly to the silent, watching crowd. Elena did not scream. She did not struggle. Her gaze remained locked on his, a silent challenge that seemed to infuriate him more than any resistance could. You think you're better than me, he growled, the words a low vibration of pure hatred. The pull was sharp, brutal, unexpected. The fine silk of her dress offered no purchase, no resistance. She stumbled forward, thrown off balance. Her other hand, the one that had been her anchor, flew out instinctively to break her fall. The world tilted, a sickening lurch of gold light and staring faces. The sound of the vase tipping over was a hollow crack, followed by the shattering of porcelain. The marble floor was a shock of icy cold against her palms and knees. Water from the overturned vase of lilies soaked the front of her white dress, blooming instantly into a spreading, dark stain across her stomach and thighs. White petals and broken green stems scattered across the black floor around her like wreckage. A collective, horrified gasp sucked the air from the lobby. The murmur of conversation died completely, replaced by a profound, ringing silence. George stood over her, breathing heavily, a triumphant, conquering giant. In her periphery, Brenda's blood-red dress was a slash of victory against the gold. Beyond them, Sarah Jenkins's camera remained perfectly steady, its lens wide, capturing the silent, devastating tableau. Elena Vance lay on the floor of the Grand Monarch Hotel, alone. The immediate aftermath was a tableau of humiliation, etched forever in the memory of those who witnessed it. Left sprawling on the cold marble, Elena was abandoned to the echoing silence of her public downfall. Elena paused for a breath, the silence lingering in the air. The quiet was a hammer blow. It vibrated in Elena's skull, a deep, unsettling thrum. The marble floor, once a cold shock, now radiated a numbing chill up her arms, through her thin silk, into her very bones. Her head throbbed, ringing, a dull, insistent ache behind her eyes. Her vision swam, a kaleidoscope of gold and red, blurring the sharp lines of the shattered vase, the scattering of white lily petals that dotted the dark, polished surface like fallen stars. The water from the vase, icy and sweet with the perfume of crushed stems, soaked through her dress, clinging to her skin. It was a dark, spreading bruise against the white fabric, mapping the exact location of her humiliation. She pushed herself up slowly, every muscle protesting, a sharp twinge in her lower back. Her hands, still slick with water and the residue of broken glass, trembled uncontrollably. The silent stares of the onlookers felt like physical blows, each gaze a judgment, a dismissal. No one moved. No one offered a hand. Just a sea of frozen faces, their champagne flutes suspended, their conversations silenced. Brenda's red dress remained a beacon of triumph beside George, whose chest still heaved with the adrenaline of his hateful performance. He watched her, a smear plastered across his face, a silent dare for her to break. Elena would not. Her chin, though trembling, lifted. Her hands went to her belly, a protective shield over the small, sacred life within. Elijah! He was quiet, too quiet. A spike of fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the dull ache. Was he okay? She pushed the thought down. No, he had to be. The exit. She needed the exit. Each step was a monumental effort, her legs heavy, her knees aching. The wet silk of her dress chafed. She left a faint, damp trail on the pristine marble as she moved, a scar of her passage. The air grew heavy, thick with the unspoken. The scent of lilies, once cloying, was now a funeral shroud. Elena took a moment to compose herself. Yes! She found herself in the relative sanctuary of the ladies' lounge, empty. The door clicked shut behind her, a faint echo of finality. Here, the opulent silence was different, less judgmental, more hollow. The air, cool and dry, smelled of rosewater and a hint of antiseptic. Her reflection in the vast, gilded mirror above the sinks was a ghost, pale, disheveled, a dark stain blossoming on her white dress. Her hands, when she saw them, were shaking so violently she could barely hold them steady. She found the furthest stall, its polished chrome handle cold under her touch. Inside, she collapsed onto the toilet seat, the porcelain surprisingly cool against her heated skin. She leaned her head against the sterile white tile of the wall. The coolness seeped into her temples, a small comfort. She closed her eyes. The image of George's face, contorted in malice, burned behind her eyelids. His words, a poisonous litany, echoed. The memory surfaced, a womb for hire, a pathetic biological key. No, not that. Never that. Her hands moved to her belly, pressing, seeking reassurance. Elijah. He was her anchor, her reason. A tiny flutter, a butterfly's wing brushed against her palm. Relief, pure and blinding, washed over her. He was there. He was okay. Her breath hitched. A tear escaped, then another, hot tracks on her cold cheeks. She bit her lip, hard, tasting blood, to stifle the sob that threatened to tear from her throat. She would not scream. Not here, not again, not for him. A soft knock, a gentle, hesitant tap on the stall door. Elena froze, her breath caught. She didn't respond. The world outside the stall felt hostile, filled with whispers and judging eyes. The door creaked open a fraction. A woman's hand, neatly manicured, slipped through the gap, holding a crisp, white linen napkin. Sarah Jenkins, the journalist. Elena had seen her in the lobby, her camera steady, unblinking. The witness. Sarah said nothing. Her gaze, when it met Elena's, was quiet, unreadable. Not pity, not judgment, just observation. Sarah pushed the napkin closer, then a small, folded business card. Her fingers lingered for a moment, brushing Elena's. Her touch was cool, impersonal, yet a lifeline. No words, no explanations, just the simple act of offering. Then, the hand withdrew. The door clicked shut again softly, leaving Elena once more in the echoing silence of the stall. Elena stared at the napkin. The business card lay beside it, stark white against the pristine linen. Sarah Jenkins, lead journalist, Capital News. A number, no message, none needed. She pressed her palms to her belly again, the soft cotton of her dress still damp. A cold fire ignited within her. George thought she was a check, a silent, anonymous check. He thought he could break her, humiliate her, make her disappear. He thought her pregnancy made her weak, an easy target. He was wrong. She would not cry, not a single tear, not another public display of weakness. She would not beg, not for understanding, not for forgiveness, not for entry. The quiet anger began to solidify, hardening into a cold, determined resolve. The world outside was loud, cruel, and unfair. But within this small, white space, a decision formed, crystalline and absolute. Elijah needed her. And she would fight. She would fight for him. The game had changed. She looked at her reflection in the polished steel of the toilet roll dispenser. A woman, soaked and bruised but no longer broken. A cold clarity settled over her. He would not be silent. Elena drew a sharp breath. As Elena forged her silent resolve miles away, the orchestrator of her torment was celebrating a premature victory. High above the city, in an office that reflected his own formidable will, George Thompson savored the night's events. The office was a cage of darkness and ambition. Heavy mahogany walls absorbed the light, giving nothing back. The air was cold, tasting of conditioned air, expensive leather, and the lingering ghost of a single celebratory cigar. Outside, rain lashed against the bulletproof picture window, the water tracing frantic, unreadable paths down the glass. Below, the city lights blurred into a smeared watercolor of gold and white. A massive, polished desk, bare except for a heavy crystal ashtray and a black, menacingly still telephone dominated the space like an altar. George Thompson swirled the amber liquid in his tumbler. The ice cracked, a small, sharp sound in the cathedral quiet. He was out of the dark suit jacket, his white shirt a stark beacon against the gloom, the sleeves rolled up his thick forearms. He watched Brenda, a slash of crimson silk, as she paced before the window, her silhouette framed by the storm-tossed city. Her bangles sang a discordant tune with every agitated step. "Did you see her face?" Brenda's laugh was a harsh, glittering thing. When she hit the floor, all that white silk ruined, like a virgin sacrifice. She stopped and spun to face him, her red dress flaring. "It was perfect, Georgie, perfect." George took a slow sip of his scotch. He did not smile. He radiated a calm, chilling satisfaction that was far more terrifying. Perfection is a process. Tonight was merely the overture. He crossed the room to the desk, his movements deliberate, imbued with the gravity of a man who believed himself a king in his castle. He ran a hand over the cool, smooth wood. From a locked drawer, he withdrew a thick, leather-bound folder. He dropped it onto the desk. The sound was a heavy, final thud. "This," he said, tapping the folder with a blunt forefinger, "is the symphony." Brenda drifted over, the scent of her perfume, something sharp and floral, cutting through the masculine scent of the room. She peered down at the folder, her red-nailed fingers tracing the embossed seal of a prestigious law firm. Divorce papers? And so much more. George opened the folder, spreading the documents across the polished surface like a butcher laying out his tools. "This is a masterpiece of legal architecture, my love. A fortress. Here," he pointed, "is the petition for dissolution of the marriage, citing irreconcilable differences. And here," his finger slid to another document, "is the emergency motion to freeze all joint assets, filed the moment she became incapacitated." He savored the word, letting it hang in the air. "But the real art," he continued, his voice dropping, "is this." He produced a sheaf of papers filled with dense financial jargon. "I've spent the last 6 months creating a parallel financial identity for her. A series of shell corporations, offshore accounts, a tangled web that seems to lead back to some very unsavory characters. To the untrained eye, it will look like our anonymous benefactors has been laundering money, a lot of it." Brenda's eyes widened. The jangling of her jewelry ceased. "George, you could go to jail for that." "She could," he corrected, a phantom of a smile playing on his lips. "She could go to jail for that. A pregnant, unstable woman with criminal ties who just had a very public, very violent breakdown at a state function." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "Imagine the headlines, Brenda. Imagine the jury. Who do they believe? Me, the decorated head of state security, or the hysterical, money-laundering basket case who tried to use her pregnancy to buy her way into a world she didn't understand?" His monologue was a rolling tide. "I will own the narrative. The journalist Jenkins, her footage of the fall will be my Exhibit A. See? Unstable. A danger to herself. A danger," he let his eyes drop, a flicker of disgust, "to her unborn child. By the time my lawyers are done, she won't just lose the money. She will lose the baby. I'll get sole custody. I'll argue that Elijah needs a stable home, away from his criminal mother." The casual, cruel use of the baby's name, a name Elena had whispered only to him in softer moments, hung in the air. Brenda was silent for a beat, processing the sheer brutal scope of it. Then, A slow, predatory smile spread across her face. She slid onto the corner of the desk, the red silk of her dress a splash of blood against the dark wood. "And where do I fit in, Georgie?" Her voice was a low purr. "After you burn her world to the ground, what's left for me? I don't want to be your deputy forever. I want a ring on my finger and my name on the deed." George looked away from her, toward the rain-slicked window. The city lights below were distant, cold stars. He seemed to shrink for a second, the arrogance falling away to reveal something else, something hollow. "My father worked his entire life in a steel mill. He came home every night smelling of sweat and metal, his hands raw. He used to tell me, 'Boy, you either own the building or you clean it. There is no in between.'" He turned back from the window, and the mask of power was back in place, harder than before. "I am not cleaning anything for anyone ever again." "I don't want to clean," Brenda pushed, sliding off the desk to stand before him, her hands on her hips. "I want to own. With you. When she's gone, really gone, you and I get married. And I want a stake in your new private security firm, in writing." He looked down at her, a long, assessing gaze. He saw the greed, the grasping ambition that mirrored his own. He respected it. He stepped closer, invading her space, his voice a low growl. "You think she still matters? You think she even exists in this equation?" He laughed, a short, sharp bark devoid of humor. "She is just the envelope. The money came in." A shift in Brenda's posture, a flicker of something new in her eyes. Calculation, opportunity. She took his hand from his side and placed it flat against her stomach. The silk of her dress was cool beneath his palm. "Then you'd better make room for the new priority, George." He frowned, confused. "There's something else," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "A reason we need to secure our future, our family." She pressed his hand harder against her. "I'm pregnant, George." The word hit the cold, quiet air and hung there. Pregnant. George's expression, frozen for a second in surprise, melted into pure, unadulterated triumph. The final piece of his new world clicking into place, he let out a great, booming laugh, a genuine sound of victory that filled the cavernous office. He swept Brenda up in his arms, her red dress a swirl of color in the gloom. "Pregnant," he roared. "My God, Brenda, this is it. This is everything." He set her down, his hands framing her face. His eyes were alight with a feverish new energy. A new heir. Our heir. Not some inconvenient project. A child with my name. A proper family. The plan, already monstrous, now felt righteous to him. Necessary. He was no longer just destroying Elena's life. He was building his own. He strode back to the desk, his purpose absolute. He snatched the heavy black receiver from its cradle. His fingers punched the numbers on the keypad with brutal precision. He waited, listening to the phone ring on the other end. His eyes found his own reflection in the dark, rain-streaked window. He saw a titan, a king, the architect of his own destiny. A voice crackled on the line. "It's Thompson," he said, his voice cold iron. "It's time. File everything, now." He hung up the phone with a definitive click. He picked up his tumbler of scotch, the ice now almost completely melted. He raised the glass to the powerful man staring back at him from the window. He had won it all. George took a deep breath. George's triumph, however, was built on a foundation of lies and hubris, a fragile castle in the air. Unbeknownst to him, the battle was far from over. The next morning, a different kind of reckoning began to unfold. The Capitol building stood like a glacial sentinel, its marble facade a blinding white against the gray morning sky. Rain from the night before had left the air sharp, metallic, carrying the faint tang of wet concrete and exhaust fumes. Elena stepped from the black town car, the polished chrome of its bumper reflecting her own pale, determined face. Her cream silk dress, though clean, still carried the ghost of the previous night's trauma, a phantom chill against her skin. She placed a hand on her belly, a familiar gesture, feeling the silent, unwavering presence of Elijah within. The hum of the city, a dull roar, seemed to intensify as she approached the imposing entrance. The grand archway, usually a bustling thoroughfare, felt strangely quiet. Two security guards, their dark uniforms stark against the bright stone, stood at the first checkpoint. One, a young man she vaguely recognized, averted his gaze. The other, older with a gruff demeanor, stepped forward. "Purpose of your visit, ma'am?" His voice was flat. "I have an appointment," Elena said, her voice steady. She didn't offer a name. She didn't need to. Her face, her previous status, should be enough. The guard's eyes narrowed, scanning her. He hesitated, a flicker of recognition, then his face hardened. "I'm afraid I don't see your name on the manifest." Confusion. She frowned. "That's impossible. I'm expected." A deep, resonant voice cut through the damp air. "She's expected, all right." George Thompson emerged from the shadow of the archway, a dark suit cloaking his imposing frame. His presence felt like a sudden drop in temperature. Beside him, Brenda Hayes, a vibrant slash of crimson silk, her gold bangles clinking like tiny venomous bells, smirked. Her eyes, magnified by the cold, glinted with malicious pleasure. "Mr. Thompson!" Elena's chin lifted. "Ms. Vance." His lips curled in a mockery of a smile. "Or should I say, Mistress Vance, for now, anyway." His gaze raked over her, lingering on her abdomen. Disgust, cold and open, settled in his eyes. He stepped closer, his voice dropping, but carrying a chilling resonance in the echoing space. "I must regretfully inform you, Miss Vance, your access to this building has been revoked." "Revoked?" Her brow furrowed. "By whose authority?" "Mine." He spread his hands, a gesture of casual command. "As head of state security, I have sole discretion regarding entry, and I deem you a security risk." Brenda let out a small, sharp laugh, the sound grating. "This is ridiculous," Elena said, her voice rising slightly. "I have vital matters to discuss with the governor." George's smile widened, devoid of warmth. "The governor is quite busy, and I assure you he has no desire to see you. Not today, not ever again." A tremor ran through Elena. This was not just a denial of entry. This was an outright blockade. She tried to push past him, a futile gesture. A junior guard moved to block her path, his face impassive. "I have business here." Her hand went to her belly. Elijah was still. She felt a surge of protective instinct. "Your business here, Ms. Vance, is concluded." George paused, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "And your business everywhere else is also rapidly drawing to a close." From behind him, a small, gaunt man in a gray suit stepped forward. He clutched a slim leather briefcase. Beside him, another, larger man, also in gray, held a stack of official-looking documents. The air around them smelled faintly of dry paper and cheap cologne. "Elena Vance?" the gaunt man asked, his voice reedy. Yes, you are hereby served. He thrust the thick packet of papers into her hands. The documents were cold, heavy. The words on the top page blurred for a moment. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Temporary restraining order. Her name, her husband's name. A cold wave washed over her, making the marble floor feel suddenly unstable. What is this? She looked from the papers to George, her eyes wide. A formal goodbye. He took a step back, allowing Brenda to move closer. My legal team has been working very quickly, efficiently, you might say. Brenda's red fingernail tapped against the shiny cover of the documents. Nasty business, divorce, especially when one party has been so careless. Careless? Elena's voice was a whisper of disbelief. Oh, darling, Brenda purred, her jewelry rattling. Let's see. Your house keys no longer work. I've had the locks changed. Your car, that beautiful Bentley, repossessed. All your credit cards, canceled. Your bank accounts, frozen. Every last penny. Imagine that. The words struck like physical blows, each one a tiny crack in the foundation of her world. House, car, money, all gone. A gasp escaped her. She instinctively pressed her hand harder against her abdomen, a desperate anchor. Elijah, you can't do this. The papers trembled in her hands. George scoffed. Oh, but I can, and I have. Do you know how quickly things unravel when the financial backbone is removed? It's quite astonishing. He gestured to the large man who had served the papers. Mr. Jenkins here from the county sheriff's office is also here to inform you that your presence at the marital residence is now considered trespassing. Any attempt to enter will result in immediate arrest. Elena's head snapped up. Trespassing? It's my home. Not anymore. George's voice was devoid of emotion. The court has seen fit to grant a temporary order of protection against you for your husband's safety. He paused, his eyes narrowing, and for the safety of his future family. His implication was clear, cutting. It struck at her deepest vulnerability, a direct assault on her bond with Elijah. A flicker of movement caught her eye. Sarah Jenkins, the journalist, stood across the plaza, her camera raised. The lens, a dark, unblinking eye, was fixed on Elena. Sarah's face was unreadable, her presence a silent, omnipresent witness. Elena felt a tremor of pure rage. You used me. You were a vessel, Elena, a convenient arrangement. George's voice was low, laced with a venomous satisfaction. Nothing more. I told you, a womb for hire. Did you truly believe I cared for you, or your inconvenient baggage? He gestured dismissively at her belly. That child means nothing to me. A biological key, as I said. The air grew heavy. The cold marble floor seemed to tilt. The words hit her with the force of a physical impact. Inconvenient baggage. Biological key. Her eyes burned. She squeezed the divorce papers, the sharp edges digging into her palms. You're a monster, she whispered, her voice raw. George merely smiled. And you, Elena, are nothing. A discarded ornament. A broken vase. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper meant only for her. You think you had power? You think your anonymous donations made a difference? You were a quiet cash machine, that's all. And now the machine is broken. He straightened, scanning the few onlookers who had started to gather. Their faces were a mix of curiosity and discomfort. And as for your little secret, George continued, his voice rising for the benefit of the small crowd, the governor was informed of your instability, your erratic behavior, your financial improprieties. He shook his head, a performance of sorrow. A tragic downfall. Such a pity. His words painted a picture of a madwoman, an unreliable figure. It was a calculated, brutal dismantling of her reputation, her identity, her life. Brenda stepped forward, her red dress rustling. She placed a hand on George's arm, her jewelry clinking. "Come, darling, there's nothing more to be done here." Her eyes, however, were still fixed on Elena, a triumphant gleam. George turned, but not before delivering one final crushing blow. "When this is over, Elena, you'll have nothing left. Not your name, not your money, not even your child. You'll be alone, exactly where you belong." He smirked. "And the governor? He already has a new benefactor. One who doesn't come with such unfortunate complications." He turned on his heel, Brenda clinging to his arm. Their figures, George's dark suit, Brenda's stark red, disappeared into the building, leaving Elena standing alone in the biting wind. The small crowd began to disperse, uncomfortable with the raw pain they had witnessed. Sarah Jenkins remained, her camera still up, capturing Elena's shattered dignity. Elena stood motionless, the divorce papers a crumpled mess in her hand. The bitter taste of betrayal filled her mouth. She could feel Elijah, a small, still weight within her. Her world, once secure, had been systematically ripped away. Every comfort, every convenience, every vestige of her previous life, gone. She closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a cold path down her cheek. Then her eyes snapped open. Her chin came up. Her hand went to her belly, a fierce protective clasp. They had taken everything, but not Elijah. She fished her phone from her small purse. It was all she had left. Elena took a slow, steadying breath. Alone, stripped of everything and utterly alone, Elena was left to grapple with the brutal reality of her new world. The emotional trauma was quickly compounded by a terrifying physical threat. The cold of the marble seeped through the thin silk of Elena's dress, a merciless chill spreading through her back and legs. She lay on the Capitol Plaza, the grand, indifferent architecture looming above. The crumpled legal documents were a testament to her ruin, scattered beside her like dead leaves. The wind picked up, a low moan that skittered across the stone, carrying the scent of impending rain and the city's exhaust. A tremor started in her lower back, a dull, insistent ache. Another tremor followed, this one sharper. A cramp that tightened her belly into a stone. She gasped, the air catching in her throat. Her hand, a constant guardian, flew to the taut curve of her abdomen. This was not the gentle flutter of life she had grown to cherish. This was a siege, a violent internal rebellion. It's too soon. The thought was a blast of cold fear. Another wave of pain hit, a white-hot spike. It tore through her. She fought for breath. Her purse was nearby, its contents spilled across the unforgiving stone. Her phone, its screen miraculously intact, lay a few feet away. With a groan, she dragged herself across the ground, the rough texture of the plaza grating against her palms. She grabbed the phone, her fingers fumbling with the screen, slick with a cold sweat. There was only one number she could think to call, a muscle memory of a life that no longer existed. The phone rang twice before he answered. His voice was distant, impatient. "What?" "George," she breathed, the word torn from her. "Something's wrong." A pause. She could hear the faint clink of a glass, the murmur of a television. He was at home. In their home. Her home. "I'm busy, Elena. I believe I made our current situation clear." "It's the baby," she gasped as another contraction seized her, making her body arch in a silent scream. "The pain, George, it's too soon. Please." The plea was a shard of glass in her throat. A long, heavy silence stretched across the line. She could feel him weighing his options, calculating. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, not kind, but hollow, stripped of its usual bluster. "My mother lost her first, a boy. My father never spoke of it again. He just went to the mill the next day. A man does what he must." The brief, shocking window into his past closed as quickly as it had opened. The mask of power slammed back into place. "This changes nothing. You are on your own." The line went dead. She dropped the phone. A guttural sob of despair and agony broke from her. She was alone. He was not coming. Her vision blurred, the edges darkening. The last thing she saw was a figure running toward her, the dark shape of a camera being lowered, its unblinking eye finally closing. She faded into unconsciousness. The world swam back into focus in pieces. The rhythmic, insistent beep of a machine, the sterile scent of ozone and antiseptic cleaner clinging to the air, the starched, crisp texture of a sheet against her skin, a cold draft from a vent somewhere above. Elena was in a bed, a stark white hospital gown replacing her ruined cream dress. A thin tube snaked from the back of her hand. Her hand went to her belly. The contractions had eased into a relentless, terrifying rhythm. The door to the private suite swished open. It was not a doctor. Brenda Hayes stood in the doorway, a vision in a blood-red pantsuit. Her gold jewelry was a cacophony of soft clicks and chimes as she stepped into the room, an assault on the sterile quiet. Her presence sucked the air from the space, her sharp perfume a cloying counterpoint to the hospital's clean scent. "Well, well," Brenda said, her lips curling into a smirk. "Look what the cat dragged in, or in your case, what the ambulance scraped off the pavement." Elena's chin lifted. She said nothing. Brenda strolled to the foot of the bed, her eyes cold and assessing, taking in the IV drip, the heart monitor, Elena's pale, sweat-sheened face. "I got the notification from the insurance group. Spouse admitted for high-risk pregnancy complications. George was occupied. He sent me to assess the situation." Her gaze dropped to Elena's stomach. "So, the little parasite is trying to make an early escape. How inconvenient for you. I suppose this is what happens when you have a dramatic public breakdown. All that stress isn't good for the cargo." A doctor, a woman with tired eyes and a firm set to her jaw, entered without knocking, stopping short when she saw Brenda. She ignored her, her focus entirely on Elena. "Ms. Vance," the doctor said, her voice a low, serious hum. "The baby's heart rate is dropping with every contraction. We've tried to slow the labor, but it's not working. We need to get him out. Now." The words hung in the cold air. "We need to perform an emergency cesarean," the doctor finished. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that echoed the beeping of the monitor. An operation, alone. A tear escaped, tracing a hot path to her temple. Brenda let out a short, sharp laugh. "Oh, this is perfect. You hear that, Georgie?" She pulled out her phone, her red nails tapping the screen. "Your little problem is about to be cut right out." She seemed to be texting, a triumphant smile on her face. Her glee was a monstrous thing in the face of Elena's terror. She was documenting this for him. The doctor shot Brenda a look of pure steel. "Security," she said to an unseen person in the hallway. Two large orderlies appeared in the doorway. "Please remove this woman, now." Brenda's face flushed with anger. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "I know you are not family, and you are not welcome here." The doctor turned her back, a final dismissal. The orderlies moved in, and Brenda, for all her bluster, was quickly escorted out, her protests and the jangling of her bracelets fading down the hall. Her downfall, starting with this small public humiliation, had begun. Nurses flooded the room. The bed was unplugged, the world a blur of movement and urgent, quiet commands. As they wheeled her through the double doors toward the operating theater, the full weight of her isolation crashed down. George's voice echoed in her mind, a venomous whisper from the plaza. The memory surfaced. "You were a quiet cash machine, that's all." She closed her eyes, and another of his pronouncements, from that night in his office she had not witnessed, surfaced in her memory as if it were her own. He had called her an envelope. The memory surfaced. She is just the envelope the money came in. She was an object, a container to be used and discarded, and now they were literally going to cut her open to remove the contents, the last piece of her old life, the only thing she had left. The operating room was a shock of cold. The air tasted metallic. A blue curtain was raised, a final barrier, leaving her a disembodied head in a sea of white and steel. She felt a pulling, a strange pressure, but no pain. She stared at the blank ceiling, the beeping of the machines, a frantic chorus. The world was silent, too silent. She held her breath, waiting. Then it happened. A sound that was not a wail but a wire, thin and sharp and shockingly alive, slicing through the sterile quiet. It was a raw, primal cry that bypassed her ears and hit her straight in the soul. It was the sound of life, a furious, defiant announcement of arrival. The desperate struggle for life had ended, ushering in a fragile, precious beginning. After the urgency and chaos of the operating room, a profound calm settled. A sense of peace washed over her. Later, in the quiet dimness of the recovery room, a nurse approached her bed. The fog of the anesthesia was slowly lifting. The room smelled of clean linens and baby powder. In the nurse's arms was a small bundle wrapped in a soft white blanket. "He's beautiful, Ms. Vance," the nurse whispered, her voice gentle. "A strong little fighter." She placed the warm, startlingly heavy bundle in the crook of Elena's arm. Elena looked down, a tiny, perfect face, a dusting of black hair. His small mouth worked, making silent, hungry motions. His eyes were closed, his face scrunched in the monumental effort of being new. He was real. He smelled of milk and innocence. Tears streamed down Elena's face, but these were not tears of pain or fear. She touched his cheek with one finger, the skin impossibly soft. All the loss, the betrayal, the brutal stripping away of her life, it all faded into the background, a distant noise. All that mattered was the weight of this new life in her arms. She finally held Elijah. The hospital room was a hushed sanctuary, a stark contrast to the chaos of the day that had birthed the new universe for Elena. A single lamp on the bedside table cast a soft golden glow across the sterile white walls, chasing away the encroaching shadows of the late night. The light painted the edges of the bassinet with a gentle halo and highlighted the subtle textures of the rough hospital blanket on her own lap. The air, though rigorously sanitized and crisp with the scent of institutional cleanliness, also carried the faint, sweet, unmistakable aroma of new baby, a primal, intoxicating perfume that clung to her clothes and filled her lungs with every breath, mixing strangely with a lingering trace of antiseptic that never truly dissipated. Elena lay propped against a stack of firm yet strangely comforting pillows. Exhaustion, heavy and profound, felt like a dense wool blanket draped over every inch of her, pressing her deeper into the mattress. Her muscles ached with a dull, persistent throb from the C-section, a constant reminder of the incredible ordeal she had endured just hours ago. Yet beside her bed, Elijah, swaddled tightly in a pristine white blanket, slept soundly in his bassinet, utterly oblivious to the world's weight. His tiny chest rose and fell with soft, even breaths, each one a whisper of life that was the only sound strong enough to puncture the profound quiet of the room. A stray beam from the lamp caught the delicate fuzz on his newborn head like spun moonlight. She reached out, her fingers still faintly trembling, tracing the delicate curve of his cheek. It was impossibly soft, impossibly small, a miracle she could almost cradle in the palm of her hand. He pulsed with a vibrant, undeniable life that transcended her own pain and fear. The world outside felt distant, unreal, as if separated by a thick pane of soundproof glass. All the blows, the cruel words, the brutal stripping away of her existence by George, they receded, diminishing to a dull, insignificant hum at the very periphery of her awareness. In the face of this tiny, perfect being, bathed in the soft lamp glow, her own suffering felt secondary, almost trivial. Her heart, still tender from the raw emotions of birth and loss, ached with a fierce, possessive love that was both overwhelming and utterly new. He depended on her, completely and utterly. Her hand instinctively went to her side again, a phantom ache blooming from the C-section incision, even though the pain medication was doing its work. She was healing, she realized. She had to be strong. For him. She swallowed, tasting the metallic tang of fear and determination on her tongue. She took a moment to gather her courage. The phone lay on the nightstand, a sleek, black rectangle that felt less like a device and more like a heavy, cold block of unresolved decisions. Its screen was dark, a void that mirrored the emptiness she felt. She had avoided it for hours, then for days, ever since George's lawyers had delivered the final, devastating blow. The numbers stored within its memory felt like ghosts of a life she no longer had, echoes of friendships and connections that had evaporated with her fortune. But there was one number, the last resort. Her father. A man of formidable will, whose presence alone could fill a room even across telephone lines. A man of strict expectations, whose approval had always been a distant, elusive star. She pictured him in his sprawling study, the rich, comforting smell of old leather-bound books, polished mahogany, and the faint, sweet and sour scent of pipe tobacco that always clung to his bespoke suits. She could almost feel the weight of his quiet disapproval, a familiar chill that had followed her since childhood. A tremor ran through her, her breath caught in her throat, a tight knot of anxiety. She knew what calling him meant. It meant admitting defeat, laying bare her catastrophic failure, acknowledging every one of his unspoken, "I told you so's." But for Elijah, she would endure any humiliation. She would crawl if she had to, slowly, with a deep, bracing breath that did little to steady her nerves. She reached for the phone. It felt disproportionately heavy in her hand, a burden of consequence. Her fingers trembled visibly as she navigated the familiar interface, finding his contact. Father. The name burned itself onto the screen, a stark reminder of the chasm between them. She pressed call, the screen briefly flashing before settling into the familiar "dialing" message. The faint, high-pitched, almost tinny ringing pierced the quiet sanctuary, each pulse echoing her own frantic heartbeat. It rang once, then twice, a third time. Each ring stretched into an eternity, an agonizing wait for judgment. Then a click. Not the cheerful, welcoming click of a phone picked up, but a clipped, almost abrupt sound that spoke of impatience. "Elena." His voice was flat, emotionless, a familiar shield, impenetrable and unyielding, honed over decades of corporate battles and emotional distance. It was the voice that had dictated her life, had judged her choices, had always known best. "Father," she managed, her voice a fragile whisper, barely audible even to her own ears. It felt thin, threadbare, utterly inadequate against the stone wall of his tone. She tasted the bitter tang of her own vulnerability. A long, suffocating silence descended, heavier than any physical weight. The soft, rhythmic beep of the hospital machines monitoring her vitals suddenly seemed amplified, a stark counterpoint to the tense quiet. It was the only sound for what felt like an age, filling the void that her father's immediate warmth should have occupied. Elena held her breath, her gaze fixed on Elijah. As if sensing her distress, the baby stirred, a small, sleepy mule escaping his tiny lips, a soft, innocent sound that was a stark contrast to the oppressive silence stretching across the phone line. Elena's heart clenched, a fresh wave of determination washing over her. She had to do this. "I imagine you're calling about your current predicament," he stated, his words precise, each one a separate cold stone dropped into a still, icy pond. There was no question in his tone, only an assertion, a confirmation of her foreseen failure. No hint of concern, no paternal worry, only the dry, academic observation of a chess master anticipating a move. I had Elijah!" she blurted out, the words tumbling over each other, laced with a raw vulnerability she couldn't hide. She hoped, foolishly, for a softening, a flicker of human connection, a grandfather's warmth. Another silence, deeper, colder. This one felt like a vacuum, sucking all the air from the room, from her lungs. She could almost feel the chill seeping through the phone receiver, numbing her fingers. Her jaw was clenched so tight it ached. "So I heard." Still no joy, no relief, no congratulations, just a stark acknowledgement, devoid of any genuine emotion, as if relaying a piece of news he'd read in the morning paper. The silence that followed was laced with disappointment, an invisible accusation hanging in the sterile air. "I have nothing, Father," she confessed, the truth tasting like ash in her mouth, gritty and bitter. The humiliation burned her cheeks. They took everything. George, the lawyers, everything. She felt the sting of tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. She would not cry. Not yet. "And whose fault is that, Elena?" The question was a low, dangerous growl, rumbling through the receiver, carrying the full weight of his judgment. "You chose this path. You chose that man. You ignored counsel, despite my repeated warnings." Each word was a hammer blow, perfectly aimed, designed to remind her of her transgressions. His voice held an undertone of grim satisfaction, as if her downfall was merely the inevitable consequence of her defiance, proving his superior wisdom all along. Her eyes burned with a mixture of shame and outrage. She squeezed them shut, a futile attempt to block out the harsh light of his condemnation. The weight of his judgment pressed down on her, an invisible, crushing burden. She could see his face, vivid in her mind's eye, the stern set of his jaw, the hard line of his mouth, his eyes etched with profound disappointment. It was the same look she remembered from childhood, the one that had always conveyed her inadequacy. The primal, visceral fear of never being good enough, of never meeting his impossibly high measure, resurfaced, clutching at her throat. A cold knot formed in her stomach. "I need help," she pleaded, her voice cracking, a raw, desperate plea torn from the deepest part of her soul. "For Elijah, please." It wasn't for her anymore. It was for this tiny, innocent being who had no idea of the storm raging around him. A sharp, humorless chuckle, dry and brittle as dead leaves, echoed down the line. It was a sound that offered no comfort, no warmth, only derision. "Help? You have made your bed, Elena. You will lie in it. You always were too headstrong, too impulsive. This?" He paused, letting the word hang in the air like a venomous dart. "Is the consequence of your folly." He sounded almost pleased. Her breath hitched. A strangled sob caught in her chest. She stared at Elijah, still sleeping peacefully, his small face serene, untouched by the cruelties of the adult world. This was not about her folly, she thought fiercely. This was about a new life, about innocence, pure and unblemished. How could he not see that? How could his rigid principles blind him to the simple truth of a child? "Father, he is your grandson," she whispered, her voice laced with a desperate hope that this single, undeniable fact might pierce through his formidable defenses. The blood connection, the legacy, the future. Surely that meant something to a man so obsessed with his lineage. "He is the product of your errors," he countered, his voice hardening, each syllable sharp and unforgiving. "I have my reputation to consider. This scandal, it reflects poorly, very poorly, both on me and the family name." His priorities were laid bare, stark and brutal. His reputation, his pride, his rigid world order. There was no room for mercy, no space for unconditional love. He would abandon her. He would abandon them. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, stealing her breath. The betrayal stung, sharper, deeper, and more agonizing than George's cruelties, because it came from family, from the man who should have been her refuge. It was a deep, agonizing tear in the very fabric of her being, leaving her exposed and bleeding. Her vision blurred, tears finally escaping her eyes, hot trails down her temples. "Consider your choices, Elena. Perhaps this will teach you the value of obedience and foresight." The finality in his tone was absolute. Then, with a cold, definitive click, the line went dead. The phone slipped from her numb fingers, landing with a soft, almost imperceptible thud on the pristine white mattress beside her. No, her father, no, he had actually done it. He had cut her off, irrevocably, utterly. She stared at the dim ceiling, the soft golden light now feeling oppressive, tears streaming silently and relentlessly down her temples, tracing paths through the dried salt of earlier tears. She had truly lost everything, alone, utterly, terribly alone in this sterile room, with only the soft breaths of her infant son for company. The silence of the deadline screamed louder than any shout. Then, a faint, quiet, and utterly unfamiliar voice came through the phone speaker. The line hadn't disconnected entirely, a residual connection perhaps, or a glitch. "Sir, are you certain?" It was a man's voice, gentle yet unmistakably firm, imbued with a quiet authority that caught Elena's attention despite her despair. "This isn't like you." The words were an unexpected, jarring note in the symphony of her father's coldness. "Stay out of this, Marcus." Her father's voice, sharper now, filled with irritation, snapped from the receiver. He sounded less composed, less in control than he had with her. "She needs assistance, sir. This boy is innocent." The voice, Marcus insisted, unwavering, quiet, determined. His words were a balm, an unexpected hand reaching out in her darkest hour. Elena felt a faint tremor ripple through her, a spark, tiny but persistent, igniting in the desolate landscape of her despair. A sudden, fragile lifeline thrown from an unexpected quarter. She didn't know the voice, didn't recognize the name, but it was there. Someone was listening. Someone was speaking up for her, for Elijah. The unexpected voice was a lifeline, a whisper of hope in the crushing darkness. As Elena clung to this improbable reprieve, the source of that quiet authority drew near, manifesting from the shadows. Footsteps approached the hospital room door, slow, deliberate, each soft scuff against the linoleum floor sending a fresh jolt of adrenaline through her. The muffled sounds grew closer, then stopped. The doorknob turned, a soft metallic click echoing in the suddenly tense quiet of the room. The door clicked open, a sound that cut through the sterile quiet. It was not George. It was not a nurse. The man who entered was the opposite of the storm that had just passed. He moved with a quiet economy, shutting the door behind him with a soft, definitive snick that sealed the room off from the world. He was tall, his frame draped in a dark gray cashmere overcoat that seemed to drink the artificial light. When he shrugged it off, it revealed a charcoal suit, impeccably tailored, but of a softer wool that didn't carry the aggressive sheen of George's armor. He brought with him the scent of the cool night air, of sandalwood and a faint, clean trace of ozone, a stark and pleasant contrast to the room's cloying blend of antiseptic and stale fear. His face was calm, his features sculpted with a precision that suggested focus rather than severity. He was not handsome in the classical sense. His power was in his stillness. His eyes, dark and intelligent, swept the room once, taking in every detail: the beeping monitor, the untouched dinner tray, the bassinet, before they landed on Elena. She breathed his name, a sound of release, of a dam finally breaking. "Marcus!" He crossed the room in 3 silent strides. He didn't go to her first. He went to the bassinet. He looked down at the sleeping child, his face softening for a single, unguarded moment. A ghost of a smile touched his lips as he watched the tiny rise and fall of Elijah's chest. Then he turned to Elena. He sat on the edge of her bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. He took her hand, his fingers warm and strong, engulfing hers. He said nothing, simply looked at her, his gaze a question. She gave a small, tired nod, her chin held high. The decision was made. He brought her hand to his lips, a gesture of profound tenderness, then released it. He pulled out his phone. It was a simple, elegant device, its dark screen coming to life under his thumb. A second man, who had entered so quietly behind Marcus that Elena hadn't even registered his presence, stood by the door. He was younger, wearing a similar suit, holding a tablet. Marcus spoke, his voice low, a murmur that was somehow more commanding than a shout. "Execute the transfer. All liquid assets from the joint interest accounts to the new primary trust." The aide at the door nodded, his fingers already a blur across his tablet. "Inform the board of the emergency clause invocation, effective immediately." Marcus scrolled through something on his screen. "And freeze the Centurion card, all of them." Elena watched, her heart a steady, strengthening drumbeat. This was power. Not the loud, brittle power of George's threats, but the silent, immense, and inexorable force of a tectonic plate shifting deep beneath the earth. A sudden, sharp chime from the nightstand made her jump. It was George's phone, the one he had left behind in his haste to have her sign the legal papers on the plaza. A notification lit up its screen. A financial alert. A transfer of $50 million has been initiated from your account. Marcus didn't look up from his own phone. Now the brokerage accounts. Liquidate his personal positions in Thorne Industries first, then the rest. Another chime from George's phone. A trade alert. Your full position in Thorne Industries has been sold. Chime. A financial alert. Your credit line has been suspended. Chime. A financial alert. Access to all accounts has been restricted pending review. The chimes came faster and faster, a digital chorus announcing the systematic demolition of a life. Each one was a brick being pulled from the foundation of George Thompson's world. Elena felt a hand on her side, a phantom ache near her incision, a reminder of what had been cut away to make room for this new, terrifying freedom. For Elijah. The door flew open, slamming against the wall with a resounding crack. George Thompson stood there, filling the doorway. He was a vision of dark fury, his face flushed, his expensive suit rumpled, his eyes, wild and frantic, fixed on Elena. He saw the man sitting on her bed, the aide by the door. He didn't understand. He couldn't. He laughed, a loud, grating sound that was more panic than humor. Well, you've been busy. He strode into the room, his presence a suffocating force. Hiring lawyers already, Elena? Wasting what little you have left on some ambulance chaser? I told you, it's over. You signed the papers. Everything you think is yours is now mine. The house, the cars, the accounts, all of it. He gestured dismissively at Marcus. Who is this? Your new charity case? Let me give you some advice, my friend. She's an envelope. A very pretty envelope, I'll admit. But once the money is gone, she is just empty paper. You're wasting your time here. Marcus slowly stood up, placing himself between George and the bed. He was slightly taller than George, but where George was a wall of bluster, Marcus was a column of granite, silent, unmovable. You must be George, Marcus said. His voice was neutral, almost curious. I'm the man whose wife you're sitting with, George snarled, jabbing a finger toward Elena. I'm the man who owns everything in this room, including the air she's breathing. I suggest you get out of my hospital room, out of my chair, and away from my wife before I have security throw you out. I am, after all, he added with a smug, self-satisfied sneer, head of security. Elena's chin was up. Her hand lay flat on the white hospital blanket, no longer trembling. Marcus looked from George's enraged face to Elena's calm one. He then looked back at George. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He delivered the single sentence with the flat finality of a judge passing sentence. I'm her husband. The words hung in the air. They did not compute. They were an error in the code of George's reality. What did you say? George sputtered, a small, choked laugh escaping his lips. Her what? Are you insane? I married her. At the state courthouse. I have the certificate, the pictures, the press releases. I am George Thompson. I am the governor's right hand. And she is Elena Vance, my wife. No, Marcus said, his voice still quiet, yet it seemed to shake the very walls. She is Elena Thorne. She has always been Elena Thorne. George's phone, forgotten on the nightstand, lit up with a call. The screen read, Credit Suisse Zurich. He ignored it. This is a joke, a pathetic little stunt, George raged, his voice getting louder, more frantic. You think you can come in here and what? Scare me? I will ruin you. I will have your name and your face blacklisted in this state by morning. You will not be able to get a job washing dishes. Marcus's aide stepped forward, holding out his tablet. On the screen was a pristine, high-resolution image of a marriage certificate. It was from 2 years prior, issued in a small, exclusive jurisdiction in the Cayman Islands. The names were clear: Marcus Thorne, Elena Vance Thorne. George stared at it, his face a mask of confusion and fury. It's a forgery, a lie. You were a contract, George, Elena said, her voice clear and strong for the first time. It cut through his tirade like a shard of ice. A 3-year public-facing contract, a beard, a necessary, if distasteful, arrangement to secure my anonymity while I funded the administration you work for. George's head snapped toward her, his mouth opening and closing. No sound came out. The infrastructure projects, Elena continued, her voice gaining strength with every word. The new hospital wing? The governor's miracle budget surplus? That was me. It was all me, the anonymous donor the press could never find. You were the public face, Marcus added, his tone dispassionate, as if explaining a simple business deal. A figurehead to manage the optics while my wife managed the assets. Your compensation was generous. You were given a lifestyle. You were given proximity to power. But the assets, the real money, were never yours. They were held in a trust, which you were a temporary signatory on. A trust my wife controlled. A trust I am the executor of. George staggered back a step, his face pale. He finally snatched his phone from the nightstand. The screen was a cascading series of alerts, missed calls from international numbers, texts from his bank managers, security alerts from his investment portfolios. His world documented in a glowing list of disasters. My mother lost her first, he whispered, the words aimless, repeating what he told Elena on the plaza. It was a bizarre, untethered thought, a fragment of his one human moment now floating in the wreckage of his ego. He looked from the phone to Elena, then to the silent, sleeping form of Elijah in the bassinet. The realization, the full catastrophic scale of his miscalculation finally dawned on him. He had not just been cruel to a discarded lover. He had attacked the queen. George slumped, the reality crushing him. His world was no longer his. George Thompson's carefully constructed empire had crumbled in a single, devastating night. Now, with the dawn, the full, public spectacle of his downfall would play out on the very stage where he had so recently orchestrated Elena's humiliation. The air was thin and sharp, carrying the metallic bite of a winter sun struggling against the cold. It clung to the massive limestone columns of the Capitol building, the same columns that had borne silent witness to Elena's public immolation weeks before. A damp chill rose from the granite steps, smelling of wet stone and the faint, acrid scent of diesel from a news van idling nearby. You could feel the frigid air seep through the soles of your shoes, a persistent, numbing cold that promised to linger long after you went indoors. The press corps was a restless organism, a huddled mass of dark wool coats, steaming paper cups of coffee, and faces pinched with cold and anticipation. Their collective breath misted in the frigid air, 100 tiny ghosts dissipating into the gray morning. The constant, nervous clicking of camera shutters was a sound like chattering teeth, an anxious, mechanical heartbeat for the tense assembly. At the top of the steps, Behind a hastily erected podium stood George Thompson. His dark, tailored suit was immaculate, a stark contrast to the unfolding chaos of his life, but it couldn't hide the strain. The muscle in his jaw jumped erratically. A faint sheen of sweat graced his brow despite the cold, a testament to the internal pressure building behind his carefully constructed facade. His face was a mask of practiced indignation, his eyes scanning the crowd with an air of a man wronged. He gripped the sides of the lectern, his knuckles white, as if holding on to the last vestiges of his authority. He was attempting to monologue, to seize the narrative before it could turn on him completely. For 15 years, I have served this state. This city is built on integrity. This administration, which I have faithfully served, is a bastion of moral clarity. His voice, amplified by the microphone, boomed with a confidence he didn't feel. The vicious, unfounded rumors circulating are nothing more than a desperate, pathetic attack by a woman scorned, a woman whose own family has disavowed her unstable and reckless behavior. He leaned into the microphone, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial growl. A woman who would fabricate a story of this magnitude, a lie so venomous, simply to ruin a good man's life. Brenda Hayes stood beside him, a deliberate slash of crimson against the gray morning, a scarlet coat, a red dress, lips painted a defiant red. Her jewelry, a cascade of noisy gold bracelets, jingled with her every slight, nervous movement, an irritatingly cheerful sound in the heavy silence between George's pronouncements. She stared out at the crowd, her expression a poorly executed mix of victimhood and defiance, her gaze flitting from camera to camera as if searching for the most sympathetic lens. A black town car, silent as a shark, pulled up to the curb. Its polished surface reflected the distorted images of the press corps as they surged, a wave of bodies and cameras turning as one. The murmuring ceased, replaced by a new, sharper tension. The rear door opened with a soft, expensive click. Marcus Thorne emerged first, a figure of quiet authority in a dark charcoal coat. He surveyed the scene not with alarm, but with a calm, assessing gaze. He didn't look at the press. He turned, offering his hand into the shadowed interior of the car. Elena took it. She stepped out, a vision in a winter cream coat over a simple cream dress. Her face was pale but serene, her expression composed, her chin was up. As the cameras flashed, a unified storm of brilliant, blinding light, her free hand moved instinctively, resting for a moment over the flat of her stomach, a silent, private acknowledgement of the life and the scar that lay beneath. She looked past the frantic media, up the long flight of steps to where George stood, her eyes holding no hatred, only resolve. Marcus led her through the parting sea of reporters. Questions were shouted, a chaotic chorus of accusations and demands. "Elena, is it true? Who's the man with you, Ms. Vance? Are you pressing charges?" They didn't stop to speak. They simply walked toward the steps, their synchronized, unhurried pace and shared silence a more powerful statement than George's desperate speech. "And here she is!" George bellowed, his voice dripping with theatrical scorn. He gestured with a grand sweep of his arm, the architect of these lies hiding behind whoever this is. He glared at Marcus, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes before arrogance took over. "You have no right to be here. This is a secure government building. I am head of security, and I am ordering you to leave these premises immediately." He had made a mistake. He had reminded them of his title. A figure detached from the press scrum. It was Sarah Jenkins, the veteran journalist from Capital News. known for her incisive questions and refusal to be intimidated. She wasn't holding a microphone. She held a small digital audio recorder, held aloft like a torch. "Mr. Thompson," Sarah's voice was clear and sharp, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "You mention your role as head of security. I have a question about your conduct in that role, specifically on the morning of November 12th, right here on these steps." George's smile tightened into a rictus. "I don't answer to tabloid hacks. This press conference is over." He motioned for his security team, but they hesitated, their eyes darting between his furious face and the unwavering calm of Sarah Jenkins. They were caught between his authority and the sheer gravity of the moment. "Then perhaps you can explain this," Sarah said, her voice steady. She pressed play. The sound that filled the cold air was brutally, unnervingly clear. The digital recording had been scrubbed of all background noise, isolating the voices with chilling precision. First, George's, dripping with contempt. "You are nothing. You have nothing." Then, the sharp, ugly sound of a slap. A choked gasp from Elena. The sickening, hollow thud of a body hitting the stone steps. A collective, audible intake of breath rippled through the press. Someone whispered, "Oh my God!" A reporter in the front row lowered her camera, her face a mask of shock. George's face went white, the blood draining from it so fast he looked like a marble statue. Brenda's hand flew to her mouth, her bracelets clattering loudly in the sudden ringing silence that followed the recording. Before he could form a response, a new sound emerged. A quiet hum of activity as several well-dressed aides, moving with the same silent efficiency as Marcus, began handing out thin manila folders to the assembled press. Inside each was a single sheet of paper, a press release from Thorne Industries, its letterhead crisp and authoritative. Sarah Jenkins, having already received hers, read from her copy, her voice steady and resonant. "A statement from the office of Marcus Thorne, Chief Executive Officer." For the past 3 years, the Thorne family has been honored to anonymously provide the core funding for the state's infrastructure and social wellness initiatives through a private philanthropic trust. We believe that true power often hides in plain sight, quietly shaping the world. Silence. A profound, echoing void as 100 minds processed the information. Then, chaos. Shouts erupted, questions flying like bullets. The anonymous donor? Thorne Industries funded the overpass? Elena Vance is Elena Thorne? Were you married the whole time? George stood frozen, a statue of disbelief. The world was dissolving around him, the narrative he had so carefully tried to build shattering into 1,000,000 pieces. Brenda, seeing her own reflection in George's downfall, finally broke. She shoved her way to the microphone, her face a mess of streaming mascara and crimson-smeared rage. "It's all lies. She's a monster. She's trying to destroy a good man," Brenda screamed, her voice shrill and panicked. "George loved me. He was leaving her for me. I'm pregnant. I'm carrying his child." It was a desperate, final gambit, a pathetic plea for sympathy. It was a lie. Her downfall, self-inflicted and absolute. From the back of the stunned crowd, a distinguished, older man in a tailored suit took a hesitant step forward. His face, known to everyone in state politics, was a canvas of deep, public shame and cold fury. Marcus's aide, the same composed young man from the hospital, stepped next to Sarah Jenkins. He spoke quietly into her ear. She nodded, her eyes wide with the enormity of the next revelation, and then addressed the crowd again. "We are also receiving a statement from Senator Hayes," she announced, her voice tight. The older man flinched as his name was spoken. "His office confirms he is Brenda Hayes' uncle." The senator looked at his niece, his face pale with the disgust he didn't try to hide. He spoke, his voice thick with the pain that was horribly, irrevocably public. "My family does not condone fraud. We do not condone these vicious lies to tear another family apart." He turned his back on her, a gesture of final public disownment, and pushed his way through the stunned crowd to leave. Brenda let out a wail, a raw, animal sound of pure desolation. Her declaration, her lie, had not saved her. It had been the final, fatal misstep that severed her from her own powerful family. She crumpled, a heap of red fabric and loud, worthless jewelry on the cold stone, sobbing without restraint. George Thompson did not move. He did not look at Brenda. He stared at Elena, his mind finally processing the full, horrifying equation. The marriage certificate he'd dismissed as a forgery. The philanthropic trust he'd benefited from without a thought. The money, the name, the baby. He saw her, standing there in her cream coat, bathed in the pale winter light, and for the first time he saw not the woman he used, but the power he had so foolishly, so completely offended. Elena met his gaze. The entire world was a vortex of noise and flashing lights and shouting voices around them, but in that space, there was only the vast, silent chasm between what he thought he had and what he had truly, irretrievably lost. Slowly, with the quiet grace of a queen ascending her throne, Elena straightened from the slight support she'd been leaning on. She stood tall, a beacon of calm in the storm of his own making. Elena rose. The air thickened, a palpable weight pressing down on the Capitol steps. The noise of the press corps, which moments before had been a chaotic cacophony, now coalesced into a single hungry roar. Flashes popped like sudden violent stars, illuminating George Thompson, still standing at the podium, a figure of collapsing grandeur. He looked less like a man and more like a poorly rendered hologram, flickering on the verge of disappearing. His eyes, fixed on Elena, held a dazed, unseeing quality, as if the sheer scale of his ruin had finally shattered his perception. The damp chill from the granite steps seemed to seep into his very bones, a profound, internal cold matching the hollow in his chest. Brenda's sobs, though muffled, provided a morbid counterpoint to the rising clamor. She lay crumpled, a discarded red doll on the cold stone, her desperate lie having detonated not a bomb, but a small, precise implosion within her own world. Her senator uncle, now halfway down the steps, did not look back. His departure was a silent, damning verdict. Marcus Thorne, ever the silent architect, nodded almost imperceptibly to his aide. The young man melted into the surging crowd, his movements as fluid and unnoticed as a ripple in dark water. Sarah Jenkins, her audio recorder now tucked away, began speaking rapidly into a live camera feed, her voice authoritative, delivering the unfolding narrative with surgical precision. The words Thorne Industries, anonymous donor, and breach of public trust became the new currency of the morning. George swayed. The muscles in his jaw worked, not in anger, but in a frantic, silent chewing motion, as if trying to taste the bitter ash of his downfall. The once immaculate dark suit now felt like a shroud, heavy and constricting. His knuckles, still white on the lectern, were the only things tethering him to the reality that was now consuming him. He opened his mouth, a soundless gasp escaping. Two men in dark suits, their faces grim and unreadable, approached the podium from behind. They moved with an unsettling quietude, their polished shoes making no sound on the stone. One, older, with distinguished gray at his temples, held a small black case. The other, younger, carried a folded document. They were internal affairs, their arrival an unspoken pronouncement of the end. The older man reached the podium, his gaze direct and unwavering. He spoke to George, his voice low, firm, audible only to those closest. "Mr. Thompson, by order of the governor's office, your services as head of state security are terminated, effective immediately." The words were precise, sharp, a punch. George flinched, a visceral recoil. He looked at the man, then at the younger officer who held out a stark official letter. George's name, bolded at the top, mocked him. He tried to speak, a choked sound. "You are to relinquish your badge and sidearm," the older man continued, his tone devoid of personal animosity, merely professional duty. Failure to comply will result in further charges. George's hand went instinctively to the heavy, polished silver badge pinned to his lapel, his fingers fumbling. It felt cold, suddenly alien. He tore it off, the sound of the pin ripping from the fabric, a harsh tear in the morning's grim quiet. He held it out, a small, meaningless disc of metal. Then, slowly, with a defeated grace, he unclipped the holster from his belt, the familiar weight of the weapon a phantom limb. He handed it over. The younger officer took both, placing them with practiced efficiency into the black case. A reporter's microphone, thrust forward, caught the older man's attention. "Is this related to the Thorn Industries statement?" He looked into the camera, his expression neutral. "The matter is under internal investigation. Further statements will be released through official channels. Mr. Thompson is no longer authorized to speak on behalf of the state." The cameras swiveled back to George. His face, stripped bare, was a landscape of pure, unadulterated shock. He had lost everything. The power, the prestige, the shield. He stood exposed. His reputation, a fragile edifice, crumbled under the weight of 1,000 flashing lights and shouted questions. Elena watched him, her hand resting gently on her belly, felt the faint flutter of Elijah within. A silent promise, a future unburdened. Her chin remained up, resolute. She had navigated this storm, not with force, but with quiet, devastating truth. Marcus stepped forward, placing a hand on Elena's lower back, a gesture of quiet support, of shared victory. He looked at George, a long, assessing gaze. George finally spoke, his voice thin, reedy, barely a whisper against the roar of the crowd. This can't be!" Elena's gaze met his. Her eyes, cool and clear, held no triumph, only a weary closure. "It is," her single, short sentence. "A period at the end of George's existence." He sagged, the fight gone, the energy drained, the suit, once a symbol of his authority, now just fabric. He was no longer a threat. He was just George, a broken man. His future, a barren landscape stretching out before him, devoid of influence, of wealth, of freedom. Suddenly, two uniformed officers distinct from internal affairs stepped forward. They moved with purpose, their expressions grim. One took George by the arm. "Mr. Thompson, you're under arrest for multiple counts of fraud and abuse of power." He offered no resistance. He simply allowed them to turn him, to guide him down the steps, away from the podium, away from the cameras, away from the wreckage of his public life. The crowd parted for him, no longer hostile, just morbidly curious, watching a spectacle conclude. He walked past Brenda, who still sobbed, unnoticed, on the ground. Their paths, once entwined in deceit, now diverged into separate hells. The Blacktown car, which had brought Elena and Marcus, now idled discreetly at the curb. Its windows were tinted, providing a sanctuary of privacy. Marcus opened the rear door. The scent of rich leather and climate-controlled air offered a stark contrast to the cold, acrid air of the square. Elena paused for a moment, looking back at the Capitol building. The massive limestone columns, silent sentinels, seemed to absorb the lingering tension of the morning. A faint tremor ran through her, not of fear, but of exhaustion. She had faced the beast. She had won. He reached for Marcus's hand. His fingers were warm, a solid anchor. She allowed him to guide her into the luxurious interior of the vehicle. The door closed with a muted thud, sealing away the clamor, the cold, the lingering ghosts of George and Brenda. Inside, the world was quiet, a haven. Elijah, in his car seat, stirred softly, a tiny, precious breath. The driver, discreet and efficient, pulled away from the curb, leaving the swirling chaos of the press behind. The car glided through the city streets, a cocoon of quiet power. Later that afternoon, a delivery arrived at the Thorne Estate, a private sanctuary hidden behind towering gates and ancient oaks. The air there smelled of cedar and damp earth after a light rain, a comforting, rich aroma. Elena sat in the nursery, bathed in the soft, diffused light of the setting sun, holding Elijah. His small, warm body was a weight of pure, unadulterated hope in her arms. His skin felt like the softest silk. She cradled him close, feeling the steady rhythm of his tiny heart against her chest. The memory of the public attack, the stripping, the crisis, the exposure, it all receded, replaced by the profound, quiet joy of this moment. His name, Elijah, tasted like a fresh promise on her lips. His future, wide open, stretched out before him, luminous and bright. Marcus entered, his presence a calm, steady force. He watched her, a soft smile on his lips. He understood. He always did. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, a silent affirmation. True power often hides in plain sight, quietly shaping the world, Elena whispered, her voice barely audible, a secret shared with her son. She looked down at Elijah, whose small fingers gripped her own with surprising strength. He was her true power, her beginning. She rose from the rocking chair, her movements fluid and strong. She held Elijah close, his head nestled against her shoulder. The world, once a battlefield, now felt like a garden. She moved towards the window, towards the fading light, towards a horizon unmarred by shadow. Every step was forward.